Hello and welcome to Thinking Fellows. I'm Adam. I'm joined by Scott and Bruce. Caleb has left us for the day. I don't even know where he is. I just know
he's going to Texas to work on an upgrade to the podcasting system with our creative director, Doug. As well, he's be moving to a new, I don't know, some thingy-dingy that you do the recording stuff he bob on.
The video stuff. Ringside, Riverside or something.
Yeah.
Nice.
Fancy stuff.
Well, Caleb's gone for the week, so when the boy's away, the old men will play. We don't know exactly when this will drop. I don't even know when our show does drop in the week. I think it's Wednesday or Thursday, but we're recording on a Tuesday, on a Monday, the day before America's national election. So we thought we'd pose the question or address the question, what to do if your candidate didn't win?
Or if they win, I guess, too, right?
Yeah. But we're going to have to be delicate here, as we are, because, we're also politically correct. We're going to try to not get into the fringes, but try to keep the conversation. The adjective I heard, I guess it would be an adverb the other day that I really like, is keep it Christianly.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. I guess it just means...
Sounds right, though.
Address the question from a Christian perspective.
Okay.
I guess we'll save the rest of the stuff till the end of the show, where we talk about this part of the 1517 Podcast Network and so on, because as we're talking, I'm going to have to remind myself what we're supposed to say at the beginning, because I don't normally do this.
So you're doing something like 1517, or I already messed it up. Thinking Fellows is part of the 1517 Podcast Network.
Yeah.
If you'd like to listen to more of the shows on the 1517 Podcast Network, go to 1517.org/podcast and check them out there. While you're there, go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and hit the donate button if you'd like to support the show, because while the podcast network is free, the people that host it, the technological entities that host it and whatnot are not, and we could always use your support to help keep this thing going.
You see how I did that? I kind of dangled something out there because I knew Scott could pull it off, so I don't have to do it at the end.
I thought you'd started not judo, but see how you did that?
Hey,
you know who's really good at that is Dan Price. When we do tough text or 30 minutes in the New Testament, man, he can just roll that off. It's amazing.
Yeah. We've been doing this 8 years now, Scott. Is that right?
I was trying to figure that out the other day because somebody recently asked me, how did 1517 start? I met with, on my drive back from Texas, met with an old friend that I actually hadn't seen for 30 some odd years, 31 years. Isn't that crazy? It's one of those friendships too, where I met with he and his wife. We went out to dinner and kind of just picked up where we left off and hadn't seen each other since
your 30s. So like 30 years ago when you were in your 30s? Or
I was in my 20s 30 years ago. Thank you. But I actually think I was probably 19 or 20 the last time we saw each other, and just kind of picked up. And I was kind of explaining how 1517 started, and then explained that Thinking Fellows was the kind of first thing that we did as a organization outside of trying to print a book or write blogs.
Yep.
Like we did a podcast. I remember meeting with Adam to say, hey, we should do this podcast. And I don't think either one of us really had a great idea about what a podcast was. Really.
Weren't we joking about our friends who were doing podcasts, and we were, we should be fancy and do a podcast.
Yeah. We weren't, but I had listened to some, I'm not even sure they were called podcasts, like triathlon training things on Apple in early 2000s. But I had no idea that podcasts had really gone into, I guess I'd say, thought work until this. And then so we started it, and with Rod and me and Adam, and Caleb back then was just a wee lad, and we wouldn't even let him talk.
Mm-hmm.
He got to just host. No opinions from. Can you even imagine how wonderful that was, Bruce? No opinions from Caleb. Just like he was just like our little gopher boy. Like, go for this, Caleb. Go for that, Caleb. Hit the record button and then shut up, Caleb. It was pretty
dance, monkey, dance.
Dan Slinky Dan. So.
Well, even though it's been 8 years, maybe even longer, I don't remember when, but I still get all tongue-tied and shy and nervous doing this stuff. It's weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
I just don't have the face for radio, as they say.
Yeah, well, it will be the face for radio once Caleb gets back from Texas and we figure out all that video stuff.
Yeah, we'll be. People can watch us as well as listen if they want.
And by the way, I know this from 30 Minutes in the New Testament. It really changes the game. You have to actually pay attention. Otherwise, apparently people notice that you're not. Because I've been accused of not looking like I'm not paying attention during 30 Minutes in the New Testament.
Because you're checking out a triathlon bike or shoes or
Caleb's like,
you're like in the latest Speedos.
What makes it worse is I can see your screen and your glasses, and you're definitely not looking at the Bible.
Well, we look like sports announcers or air traffic controllers. We got these giant headsets that Caleb got to sound nice, but now we look. I have to start talking in my radio announcer voice.
Well, trust me, the alternative is a microphone, and the mic discipline needed for that you may have, but I do not have. I cannot sit still. Like we tried stationary mics, and it was really, really bad. I'd move around way too much.
The ones that just sit in front of you.
Yeah, I can't do it. I mean, I'm standing up, sitting down, messing with the dot. This is the whole thing with the video. I'm all over the place, and Caleb's like, "It's ridiculous. Can you just sit still and look at the
That's
camera?"
why Caleb got you that self-moving AI camera that follows you.
Oh, yeah. But sometimes, like, if you, like, look down, it's all of a sudden looking at your crotch, so that's not good.
Speaking of crotch, why don't we talk about politics?
Yeah, we probably bantered enough. Everybody's wondering
Oh, okay. I think our banter is interesting, but that's fine.
I do too.
Politics. So, who you vote for?
I'll tell you who I'm voting for.
Straight
Republican ticket.
Yeah. And I live in California, so I will probably vote mostly the straight Republican ticket too. And my other option is just not voting for certain positions because there's just not a good option on either side.
I mean, I guess I should say there's sometimes where I just leave it blank because both stink.
Sometimes too, I don't look enough at looking to anything, some particular position or something enough to feel like I have really an opinion on it, and so I leave.
I'm in a swing state this year, so my
your
vote matters.
Having come from Connecticut and then New Jersey, which are not swing states, it feels weird to be like, oh, I'm getting a lot of pressure and phone calls and mail, and so way more than my parents in Connecticut and my friends in New Jersey, because in Pennsylvania everybody wants my vote.
I have a Nevada phone number from Northern Nevada, which is always sort of Northern Nevada is not usually swinging; it's usually pretty straight Republican. But I am getting a lot, from people that still think I live in Douglas County, Nevada, being like, "You better step up, you better get out there." So that's pretty funny.
Yeah,
I don't get any from, I think, California. People that think I'm in California that say that. So.
Do we want to, without, I don't know if this is wise or not, and feel free to put the kibosh on it, but do we want to talk about why we might be voting the way we are in an aloof sort of abstract sort of way before we get into the question, what are you going to do Wednesday morning?
I can't. I mean, I can pretty easily and feel pretty confident about doing it. Is that I cannot come to terms with voting for anybody that would support the genocide of children in any sort of way.
Well, since you put it that way, good heavens.
Well, I'm serious about that. Like I've decided to stop being soft-spoken on this issue, and I've watched the I guess the rhetoric change from protecting the rights of women to choose and whatever the language was before to just, in fact, I just got done with I'll call it a road trip, which necessitates staying in hotels a lot. And when you're in hotels, you see commercials at a level that you don't at home usually because none of us have cable anymore, right? And the commercials supporting particular candidates are basically like the worst, they'll say things, and paraphrasing, the worst thing that could happen is that somebody could take away my right to kill my baby at any time I want to kill it. And I just can't stomach it. I just can't stomach it. I mean, this for me ties into the show that we did on, a couple shows we did on neo-paganism, the one with Mike Horton and the one that we did sort of on our own, on neo-paganism, and showing that we are really moving sort of out of postmodernism into a neo-pagan age. And one of the hallmarks of neo-paganism is the sacrifice and mutilation of children. And I think that political positions that, don't even try to hedge their bets on that or hedge their rhetoric on that, but get 100% behind both, mutilation of children and murder of the most innocent, if there is such a thing, which would be, babies, is just something that has to be opposed. And while I don't think that Trump has softened his rhetoric on his, I guess, protection of unborn children, he's not gone over the top as the Democrats have. And that just, for me, that just necessitates that I can never support that. Now, this does not mean nor imply that I really love a lot about the modern Republican Party and or Donald J. Trump, because there's a lot that I find very wanting there. But at the end of the day, that one issue is enough for me to say I just can't. My two options would be just to not vote, or to, if I'm going to make a positive move, to kind of like what Adam said, basically vote the straight Republican ticket. Now, as Republicans become weaker on this position, that's going to take more thought on my part, and probably on your part too. Like, what does that mean moving forward? But I just think that we have moved into a neo-pagan age, and there's some real signs of it. And this, language changing. Do you remember when they wouldn't even like use the language of abortion? It was, right to choose. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've changed that now. It's just straight up my right to an abortion, my right, and if you take the euphemism away, that's my right to kill my unborn baby. As if anybody has a right to murder.
Yeah.
And drives me nuts. So I think I'm making Bruce nervous. But
No, you're not making me nervous.
you asked.
He asked, or I think I asked.
Somebody asked.
But
hey, Caleb, we're going to send this episode to Caleb's like, nope, for the archives. We're acting like we have any control over what goes out.
Yeah. I like to send, as you two know, over the top memes and whatnot. And it's all just for fun. Usually when I'm sitting in the toilet or we're sitting in traffic at a stop.
I mean, that's just so good to know.
Yes. Yeah. In like you said earlier, just a bit ago, Scott, I mean, the Republican Party leaves much to be desired. But
yeah,
I mean, the issue of abortion, I've long been, in many ways, a one-issue kind of voter. But not in reality, but I mean, if you can't get that right, I don't know if I can trust you or anything else. If it's not clear to you that one ought to protect the most vulnerable among us, then I got issues. And I've been really disappointed with the Republicans in the softening of their pro-life stance, or I don't even know what the rhetoric is now. The exceptions, and then the stuff. I don't even know enough about IVF to comment, but I know there's bioethical issues involved there, and yeah. And then we were talking before we hit record. I don't want to think like abstractly about international sort of things, but I am concerned about American security. We seem to be, not to quote Trump, but we seem to be kind of a nation in decline in many ways. And
so if we're to wrap this into sort of what we're supposed to be doing, like,
yeah, maybe we should.
as a show. I think that's all this is.
Look at Bruce. Wait, hold on. Look at Bruce. He's not saying anything.
Yeah.
Well, I was waiting
his
for my
cards
turn,
close to.
but-
Oh, go for it. Before I do my little wrap this into what we're supposed to be doing, go for
No,
it.
I was just saying I'm not a one issue voter, although for me, if I had to sort it out, I would say abortion probably is my most important sort of moral issue that I vote when I'm thinking about moral issues. But I just think there's too many good moral issues that need to be fought for, and that I just can't be a one issue voter on that ground. I think for me, the sort of recent Supreme Court case has eased up for me the anxiety I feel about always having to vote just on the abortion issue alone and not also take into account other issues. It's been left up to the states, and so it's important to still elect people who are going to be pro-life in those states.
I totally agree.
But I don't feel the pressure I used to feel since that case has come out. But honestly, this year I am voting really. I'm an anti-voter. I'm voting against things that I don't like. I'm not voting for things that I like. And it's really feels like picking the lesser of two evils. And I don't think either one of the candidates really has a superior moral ground. So it's more, I think, based on a fear of what could happen and voting against that fear. And either way, I'm just a complete pessimist on either candidate. I deeply, deeply dislike both of them. And I find no optimism in either. I sort of see like, hey, do you want the America that is bad, or do you want the America that's a little more bad? That's your choice. And so I don't get worked up about it like some people do. Everybody's like, this is the most important election in our lives. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard that my entire life. Every single election, people have told me that it's the most important election in my life. And every election is important. But I just don't buy into the stakes that this is somehow, more or less important than any other election. I know people disagree with that.
Well, I just got done with this long road trip with a friend that we all know, and we were talking about this, and he pointed out he's older than us, wiser than us, more successful in all of this. So he's like my E.F. Hutton. When he speaks, I listen. And so he said, basically that is that his opinion has always been, for the same reasons, Bruce, too, is that he said his entire life and career, it's always been, the cliff is just over the next election and we're going to fall off of it. And he says we never do, or we never have. He'd be the first one to admit that doesn't mean that we're not going to at some point.
Right.
But that his lived experience is that we haven't yet. And he said his dad always, when he first started voting, he said, you can think your vote doesn't matter, but what you're really doing is you're canceling out the vote of one person who didn't really think about it, or is just making a dumb vote. If you try to make an informed vote, you're canceling that one out. And like, oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. And then the other thing he said, like you, is it's like, you vote in a particular way to try to move the needle a little bit in the direction you want it to go. You can't ever think that you're fixing the problem, because you're not. The problem is deeply rooted in human sin and ambition and everything that comes along with that. And you're just not going to fix it with any particular vote. And I tend to agree with that. Now, the funny thing, what I was going to say is that it's been interesting doing both Tough Text and 30 Minutes in the New Testament with Dan Price this year, because, it has sort of forced me to go verse by verse through the New Testament in a way that I really haven't had the opportunity or the motivation to do in a long time. And one of the things you find out is that, and I said this in my talk at Here We Still Stand, is that Jesus seems to be, in his teaching, wholly uninterested in two topics. Mm-hmm. And that's politics and money. Like, the two things that we obsess about, like our money and our political system, seems to be like the two things he is just he just doesn't care about, which
is magnified by the sense that he's the Messiah, so they're expecting him to be a political character, right? Like historic, like you're absolutely right, but also it's even more than what you're saying, because like at the time period, people are like, well, he's supposed to be. I mean, Judas really thinks he's.
Well, they all do.
I mean, but Judas is
Peter. This is Peter pulling him. I mean, the great Peter pulling him aside right after he makes the quote unquote great confession and telling Jesus, as Jesus says, "I'm going to go up and suffer and die," and he's like, "May it never be."
And the guy carries a sword around everywhere, which we forget. Yeah. It's only at the end he's like, "Yes, finally, it's time."
Yeah,
here's for everyone.
Yeah. So. I mean, that's the funny thing. And, one could make the argument that as bad as our political situation seems to be to us, that theirs was worse, right? That they were an occupied people, in a land that had suffered various occupations throughout its entire history, currently occupied, currently subdued. Their religion and their politics were sort of ruled over by a class of people that were obviously corrupt, in many ways. And
have you forgotten how put down we are? Isn't that the lyric from Jesus Christ Superstar when Judas opens up the rock?
I don't know, but that's good. Yeah,
you've forgotten how put down we are.
Yeah. And so that's been interesting to me this year, since these have sort of coincided, right? That we're going through this year of political mayhem, and we have a presidential candidate who's had 2 assassination attempts on him that seem wholly unimportant to, the media at large. We have had interesting twists and turns with Biden's, stepping down out of the election, but not out of the presidency, and Kamala Harris stepping into it. And again, just sort of like with a 1984 style, this is how it's always been, coming from our media. And you have that going on at the same time for me. And then at the same time, I'm going through the New Testament, and and even if you've done some preaching this year, or you're preaching every Sunday this year, the Mark texts have been all up in this stuff too, where Jesus is just like, when it comes to politics, and when it comes to money. And you go, wow, this is really interesting. Maybe if our politics go to complete crap, many people would say that they're there, that it's still going to be okay from the perspective of who I am as a Christian, because my life here in this world was never expected to be easy as a Christian, or to be politically satisfying as a Christian, or rewarding, or politically victorious as a Christian, because that's not the promise. The promise is that the gospel and Christ have freed me from sin, death, and the power of the devil, and that the overcoming that I have will be in the life of the world to come. And until that time, the job is actually to endure here and to preach the gospel. And so, I mean, to the question that we started with in the show, what will you do if your candidate wins or loses after this? I guess the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think when I was thinking of the question, I was thinking about it maybe in a different angle than you're saying, because I agree with you. Of course, we should carry on as we have been called to, and hopefully are already living. But I think there is also a natural tendency to, and temptation is maybe the better way to put it, to sort of, and we all know this, to make sort of our political views into a sort of functional civic religion. And it can entangle itself with our theology and create really bad theology. And it can also distract us and worry us in a way that we forget that God is on the throne and moving history towards its course. And that doesn't require quietism, but it does ultimately, it's still the truth. And so, if your candidate wins, I think we need to be gracious to the other half of the country whose candidates have lost, and not gloat and not rub it in, and not be arrogant and haughty with it, because it's good for our neighbors to know that the other half of the citizenry still respects them. And that's what we've lost. We've lost a lot of civility. So if your candidate wins, I would say you don't need to go on social media and you don't need to tell everybody how, wonderful it is that they've won and thank God this other candidate didn't win. That's sort of like rubbing it in. You can be happy your candidate won, but I don't think you should rub it in. I don't think you should be arrogant about it. And if your candidate loses, I don't think you should think it's the end of the world. I don't think you should put your hope in princes. And we still serve a sovereign God. So, I don't know always the relationship between divine sovereignty and human responsibility. I know we're all going to go out and we're going to vote. There's some just mysterious sense, though, where God has also said he has appointed the rulers, even though we're sort of getting to pick the rulers. And again, I can't reconcile that in a clear way, but it's just they're both true. And the Lutheran would just be like, yeah, we get to vote, and God puts people in charge.
Well, he works through means.
Yeah. But
this is what we find out all the time. We really want God's direct intervention in everything. And he's like, oh, I'll work through that rock instead. Thanks.
Yeah. So if your candidate loses, it's not the end of the world. And you don't need to become terrified and do dumb things, whatever those dumb things would end up being. And I think that everybody's afraid of that, whether you're religious or irreligious, which is like, how's the country going to respond to what, half the people in this country are going to be really hurt, scared, and upset on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. And the other half are going to be like, woo, yeah, we avoided the Armageddon. We avoided the end of the Republic. We avoided the end of morality.
See, it's the difference between me and a lot of people. I think we've already not avoided the end of the Republic.
Well, yeah, so to your earlier point, Scott, I was actually going to say this. This just wasn't the time to interject, which is like hegemonies America's in decline. Hegemonies tend to fall from the inner rot. And it's almost incidental, like when they fall, who was in charge. Yeah. It's like you could have been someone else. They would have fallen around the same time anyway. And to me, Christians need to reclaim the sense that they have the power of the gospel, which not only saves souls, but also is for the good of the world. And as we live out our faith in the way that Christ has called us to live it out, it's a much more difficult work. It's like being an ambassador, being a missionary, to convert people's hearts to the truth than sort of wielding the levers of political power and mandating what morality is or what people should or shouldn't do. We are afforded that right through the democratic process, but we put our hope in it too much, I think, as Christians too often. And the harder work is to really love your neighbor, listen to your neighbor, and show them the love of Christ so that their hearts can be transformed and so that the country becomes, if you say it this way, more moral through the transformation of the heart than through the sort of operative levers of the wielding of power over someone. We know what Paul says, the law makes us rebellious. So there's an irony to your party winning and telling all the other half of the country that they don't get the things the way they want. Well, okay, that's fine. Now you have the power right now. But that's just going to make them all the more energized to want to oppose you. So we have, there's something advantageous about the parliamentary system of government where they sit across from each other and there's a government and an opposition because it's very clearly like there are two sides. But the American system, they designed the House and the Senate to be in a half circle to kind of represent that everyone was equal but all working for the same good. But it feels much more parliamentarian to me nowadays than that sort of, hey, we're going to cooperate, we're all on the same side way of doing things.
Yeah, like we do always think we're voting in a government,
right,
and expect that the president, when he, well, this is what happens now quite a bit, and that's why it feels that way. Is we have a way it's like we're the Rush Limbaugh show now. We have like a Congress that doesn't do its job, and so you do have a president comes in, he or she, I suppose, nominates a cabinet, and then they get to the business of putting out executive order after executive order, and it kind of is like there's a parliamentary government that gets put into place every time. But
the problem is that the executive branch and the judicial branch really have gained so much more power over the last 100 years while not increasing the power of the legislature. And so there's a real imbalance. The legislature was always intended to be the most powerful body because it had, more direct representation. And yet it's really the court and the executive branch now that wield the most power in the republic. And it's It's too bad.
One of the big reasons why I think it's all gone. But back to the gospel. No, I like your points a lot. Is that we cannot believe or act as though, the outcome of Tuesday's election will give us the right as Christians to treat people as though they're not our neighbors. And this has become all too common, just way too common. And so even if we completely disagree with them, even if we think they're doing complete wrong, we have to pray for their repentance and that they're brought back to the knowledge of the truth. That's our prayer. Right? Our prayer isn't the prayer of a smiting. It's a prayer that they would repent and be brought back. And that's lost so much. And also I think that the point that we put our hope in politics more than we tend to put our hope in the gospel is just so true, and kind of tragic.
Well, I will channel Augustine. I brought this up in our podcast. Adam and I were guests on Kelsey's podcast, and
I see that. I'm actually looking at the 1517 to YouTube.
Kelsey had us on. It was we ended up becoming two, I think, because we talked for so long, right, Adam? So she divided it into two. But Augustine makes a point in this City of God that all of the political realm, if you will, has already been judged by God and found wanting and guilty. There's no, to put it in a modern context, neither political party is more aligned or closer to God's will than another. There are issues that each of those parties support that you could objectively say are closer to, but to say intrinsically like one party is sort of on Jesus's side more than the other, that's to co-opt religion in the state in a way that makes me really uncomfortable. But I think a lot of people just assume that, and that informs their voting choices. And I would say, vote your conscience, vote your morality, but you don't need Jesus to back you up on that and say like his DNA is more in one of the parties than the other, because those parties are out for themselves ultimately. It's all about power. And they will only use the Christian message to the extent that it will be advantageous to them, and when it stops being advantageous to them, they will persecute the church. And that is the history of power. And so we just have to be, what's the verse? I'm only getting part of it. Be like a wise as serpents and gentle as doves, or something like that. I think that's the sort of way we have to look at it.
I wonder how much of that, which you just described, is the reality, and what I mean by that is, if I go on social media, that's what I see. Well, when I'm waking up in the morning, as I will on Wednesday morning, and I've got the kids around me, and then I'm most likely on Wednesday morning, I'm going to go to jiu-jitsu, as I do, and there's going to be my circle of people I actually interact with is going to expand a little bit more. It's going to be a lot more diverse, not just in like the way they look, but in terms of ideas. And for the last year or however long this elections or the campaigns have been going, I've not heard, people express their opinions, but it's not, interestingly, Americans, at least where I am, are generally pretty neighborly towards each other. It's when all of a sudden it becomes kind of an abstract thing, when people feel free, like I do when I'm sending stuff to Scott, because I think it's like just between Scott and I, or Bruce and Scott and I, but when I'm actually interacting with a real live human being, and I think it's this way for lots of others in the United States. Now, I'm sure there's lots and lots of exceptions. I think by and large, most people are going to go back to life as normal on Wednesday morning. There will be those who are going to thumb their noses in the face of those, or the party that lost, and vice versa. But back to Scott's point, I think it's important to remember that just like government is a kind of a mask of God, so too are each and every one of us with respect to the people we interact with. And so I get wrapped up, as you know, as I hinted at already, I get wrapped up into all this stuff. I love, it's almost like a comedy to me. It's a clown show is what it is, watching all this stuff.
It's entertainment.
Yeah,
I said the video on how this this all goes, I might have to change what podcasts I listen to. And I literally said, change what form of entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
circus is what it is.
It really is. And it's, I guess maybe it's a way of escaping me just sort of, because I want to take it seriously, but if I take it seriously, I don't get depressed in a clinical way, but I get a bit angry. I think about, my goodness, I've got myself, lots of friends who gave up years of their lives in service to this country. I've got kids, as does Scott, and grandkids in the case of Scott, because he's grandpa, because he's a little older than me, but
I'm not that much older.
They have futures, and I mean, while voting is civic, it's an obligation, and I think we could say, and it really does matter in one way or another. Why it matters so much in a democracy, because it does affect the future. And I think I'll be fine for the next, I don't know, what am I, 50-ish? Yeah, I'm 50, soon to be 51. But for the next 50 years, I'm most likely going to be fine. But are things going to be fine for my kids? That's the thing and their kids. That's the thing I'm most interested in. And
well, can you say that probably not, but probably not in the same way that they're probably not for you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I just watched, this is going to sound really stupid. I'm going to bring this around. I'm going to bring this around. I promise. You just got to stick with me. Hold on.
Disclaimer is coming.
Just stick with me. We look back on the 80s as like the great time, right? Even when I see like videos from the 80s, I get all nostalgic. I'm like, oh, the 80s were so great compared to now, weren't they? And everything's crazy now. In the 80s, everything was great, right? And then I was sick. And so when I'm sick, I watch documentaries. And so I watched a Whitney Houston documentary. And, they start out by playing all the great Whitney Houston songs. And you're like, and the videos from MTV. And you're like, oh, see, this was great. This is so much better than now. Look at how great this is. Then they start telling Whitney Houston's life story, right? And this like picture of great is pathetic, right? She's like becomes a sex addict at like 16 years old, becomes a drug addict at like 15 years old. This is all hidden her entire life until her life ends in a drug-addled stupor in a hotel room where she drowns herself after overdosing on cocaine. And she created such a bad life for her child that her daughter does the same exact thing 3 years later. And it's
I had no idea she was dead. Wow.
Pathetically sad, and so things felt like they were pretty good in the 80s, right? But overall they weren't. There was sin and corruption and, nuclear fears about nuclear holocaust then as now and on and on and on. And so we say, well, what about our kids with all the trans and people dressing up like kitty cats in high schools and all this weird stuff? And it is weird and bizarre and has the Overton window of what's, weird and bizarre and normal moved. Absolutely it has. But your kids are going to deal with that in the same way you've dealt with the change from when you were a kid till now, right? And it's going to be okay and not okay in the same way. Don't you think? Unless it all falls off the cliff.
I think it's kind of like, if
the sense you might pray for.
If I showed you if I held up a mug, like a coffee mug, and you didn't see the handle, like the handle was facing me, right? So when you first see it, it just looks like it's a completely round object. But then as I turn it, like, oh, you can see there's a handle to it, and maybe there's another image on the other side. I think, Scott, to what you're saying, Ecclesiastes would agree with you, right? Because it would say, don't look back on the former days and say they're better than these. Saying such a thing does not come from God. And it'll also say there's nothing new under the sun. Right, so it's still corrupt now. It was corrupt then; it's corrupt now. But then also, like when people look back through the lens of history and sort of a longer view, people go,
"I always think that you're right.
I'd much rather live now than I would 500 years ago, where I'd have
I would have
been dead at 7.
The old joke is like, when you're nostalgic, when would you rather live? And the best answer is as close to 3 days ago as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Because,
so it's a little bit like Charles Dickens, right? It's like the future's going to be the best of times and the worst of times.
Yeah.
Like it's both.
Yeah.
and it just takes what eye you want to see it in. But it's objectively, I think, both. Like, it will be worse for his kids from the perspective of what Adam hopes to want to see in the world, right? But it'll also be better than maybe some of the way things are now. It'll just be a vomit of different.
Well, you know, I try to be a prophet, and I usually stink at it. But you guys know from us talking mostly off air, what I think the big impending issue is the sort of depopulation of the world. The fact that we're just not having kids. What is it? Something like, since abortion was legalized all over the world, 3.7 billion children have been aborted.
Since online pornography has come out, the rates have been like...
Yeah, the fertility rates. And it's online pornography. It's views about... I mean, it's all sorts of things, right? There's lots of good modern books on this. And this is going to create two scenarios, right? The two scenarios is that the political landscape is probably going to change because the people that are having kids are ultra-conservative. Like, if you see a big family... You know, people that are procreating, they're probably ultra-religious and ultra-conservative.
Well, Islam will probably become the dominant world religion for that reason as well.
In the world, but probably not in the United States, right? That's still probably going to mean Christianity for the most part of one form or another, which means that if you look a little bit into the future, the politics are probably going to swing, you know, relatively, taking that Overton window into account, relatively more right then we think they're going to keep going left just because of the people, right, that are being born and into the families in which they're being born. But there's going to be fewer of them, which is going to create a lot more problems than we know, including problems with, you know, maintaining current infrastructure, developing new infrastructure, developing new technologies to help us maintain current infrastructure. I mean, just countless financial problems with supporting our budget. I mean, I'm not trying to make anybody laugh here. But like, I'm trying to be fiscally responsible on a national.
But, you know, I'll be optimistic here for a second with you, Scott, in that America's strength has really always been, I mean, there's many of them, but one of them has been its immigration. Now, illegal immigration is a different issue, but what it means to be an American is that it's a melting pot. It's a place, like, Americans talk in weird ways compared to anyone else in the world. They say, like, well, I'm an Italian American, I'm a Norwegian American, I'm a German American, like, they recognize where they came from in their history plus add American to it. But most other countries in the world, they have a homogeneity that prevents them from, like, they have to protect their culture, which is very monolithic and goes back, you know, hundreds or thousands of years sometimes. And they don't have the natural resources or the infrastructure or the size to sometimes take in immigration. And the U.S., because it can take that in, and it's not an intrinsic existential threat to American identity to have immigrants, just in general. It's just not. We've always been a country of immigrants. You can always populate the states. You can always keep America populated. You can't do that in a lot of countries. One example,
what's funny
Sweden and Norway, whose population created problems for their egalitarian programs.
I was sick. I watched a Ben Franklin documentary, and they do this big, long Ben Franklin quote where he's worried about immigration, and he's worried that the German immigration is going to change the fabric of America from being less Anglo-Saxon, to being Germanic, and he's really bugged about it. Like,
in the 1800s, it was the Irish.
Really annoyed.
Or like, oh, they're going to ruin it.
And then the Irish, and then
yeah. I think Bruce has a fondness for Anglo-Saxon.
I do.
And see, so you probably.
I have right on my shelf here. I have a nice book on the Sutton Hoo hoard find from many years ago, the Anglo-Saxon king.
Oh wow!
Aren't you fancy?
Right next to my Duolingo book on Beowulf.
Oh. So,
your intuition's correct, Adam. That's my name.
So, how do we wrap this up?
Well, I want to, but I've been thinking as you guys have been talking about Bruce's earlier comments about how living in our age is increasingly feels like living in a missionary age, or something along those lines. I think you said. I mean, regardless of what happens, we still live where we live, and where we live is very different than America, 30 years ago, or whatever, in terms of the people we're around. And I mean, this might sound like pie in the sky kind of thing, but the opportunities for Christians to give new witness to the gospel to those who have never heard it, I think are escalating. And maybe, and I'm going to sound like a person that you see on like a 3 a.m. commercial on TV selling something. While there's lots of challenges before us, there's also, those opportunities those are the sort of things that God uses. Bring the gospel to people. I think
quite honestly, Christianity thrives in those times more than it does in times like this.
Yeah. And I've been reading in the last couple months the first epistle of Peter. It's real quick. You can read it in 30 minutes, but just reading it over and over again. And I'm always struck by the opening where Peter addresses those in the diaspora in Asia Minor, Turkey, right? But he refers to them as not just exiles, but the elect exiles, as if God has sort of orchestrated their dispersion for the sake of the spread of the gospel. So we can't say what God's doing behind the scenes of history. We can speculate on it, but we do know historically this is how, as you said, Scott, this is how Christianity actually grows, thrives, strengthens the face of adversity. Not to say that politics is something that infringes on the church, but it does actually in one way or another. So I don't know, Bruce, you got anything to say to that?
I would just think it's great. And I would just say, keep your trust and your hope in Christ, and be an ambassador, be a missionary, be salt and light.
Well, go ahead. I agree. If you keep your hope in the one who promises to be your hope, nothing is going to make you hopeless. No matter how bad from your perspective the political system gets in your country, wherever your country is, you can decide to try to influence it in the ways that your political system has set up for you to be an influence in it. But beyond that, don't place your hope in it. Your hope is in Christ alone. And if you keep your mind centered on that, and keep your faith centered on Christ, all of this too shall pass. And when it does pass, you'll wake up in glory, and you'll finally be in the one system that actually makes sense for you.
Yeah. Amen. Well, this has been a good, 45-minute conversation on a topic that Caleb's probably going to roll his eyes at when he over this. So
he isn't ever going to hear it anyway. So it was good hanging out with you.
Yeah. We thank you for joining us. This has been a production, I guess, of the Thinking Fellows Podcast Network. You can find that again, to repeat what Scott said at the beginning of the show, at 1517.org. Is it a / podcasts, or is it /? It must be.
Just do like all of us do and type in your search bar 1517 podcast.
Yes.
It addresses.
And we'd certainly appreciate a positive review if you're so inclined. And if you're further inclined to support us, we need all the help we can get. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.